He was a morbidly obese surgeon destined for an operating table and an early death. Now he's a rebel MD who is fabulously fit and fighting to make America healthy again. This is Stay Off My Operating Table with Dr. Philip Ovadia.
Races. Welcome back, everybody. This is the Stay Off My Operating Table podcast, and y'all know the players. I'm Jack. Dr. Ovadia is the genius behind this whole thing. And we are joined today by the first guest, I think, who claims to be a potter and a pilot, as well as the other stuff. So, Phil, set the table for us and let's get into this conversation.
Sounds good. Really excited to introduce Dr. Robert Kiltz to our audience. Rob is a OB-GYN physician with an expertise in fertility. And as far as I know, he's one of the few fertility doctors that is really focusing on metabolic health. And that's why I'm really excited to have this conversation. I was fortunate to spend some time in Costa Rica with Dr. Kiltz filming our reversed carnivore reversed television series, which will be coming out hopefully shortly. And
whoa. This is the first I've heard about this. I knew you were coming to Costa Rica, but
it was a little bit under wraps, but the project is coming to fruition. So we'll get into all of that. But before we discuss these things, I want to give Rob a chance to introduce himself to our audience.
Well, thanks for inviting me, Phil. I really appreciate it. And we did have a great time in Costa Rica, learned a lot about what each of us do. As you said, I'm a potter and a pilot, but I'm a reproductive endocrinologist, a fertility specialist that found that that nutrition is far more important than we were ever taught. And the important part of nutrition is everything we've been taught is wrong. And so we're finding that a new way of thinking, which is mostly carnivore keto, if you want, some ideas to heal people and keep them out of my office and off your operating table.
Very good. So, why don't you start by telling the audience how you got to that point that you realized the importance of nutrition in the problem that you were treating, you were focusing on, which were mostly fertility problems.
Well, I personally suffered from migraines and bowel problems since I was a child, ADHD, OCD, dyslexia. I managed to go to medical school and I wanted to go into family practice, but I ended up going to OBGYN and then subsequently reproductive endocrinology and fertility. I practice IVF. I'm a surgeon, and I've been doing it for nearly 30 years. And probably about 20 years ago, I started incorporating Eastern medicine, acupuncture, massage, meditation, prayer into our standard practice in order to reduce stress for people, to keep them on the journey of the infertility treatments. Some of my patients were getting pregnant on a diet, and it was the paleo diet. And I was really interested in, how'd you get pregnant on a diet? And what we were doing wasn't working. So I started digging myself into understanding about nutrition, and I read all about paleo diets and then keto diet. I'd already been doing Atkins and Weight Watchers and crazy exercising for years. And then I fell upon carnivore. Many of my patients were getting pregnant on keto, and that's mostly what I shared for a long time. But I've been personally carnivore for about 12 years, and my diseases got better on keto and paleo, migraines, kidney stones, bowel bleeding, arthritis, psoriasis. But when I went carnivore, everything went away in about a month. And so I dug deeper and deeper trying to understand the cause of disease and why keto and carnivore help significantly, and why our standard healthy diet and lifestyle is actually the killer and the cause of all our diseases like cardiovascular disease and infertility. So I'm just a proponent that we need to teach people this so they don't get the diseases, and if they're suffering, potentially they'll heal from them.
So there might be, in a lot of ways, I can point to some obvious things about how metabolic health, relates to heart disease and relates to things like diabetes. But it's not obvious how it relates to fertility. So what are some of the specifics as, the impact of poor metabolic health and a poor diet has that leads to fertility problems?
That's a good question. And it's interesting because many of my patients are healthy, yet they're infertile. Well, being infertile is actually the canary in the coal mine, I call it, because if you're not reproducing, something's wrong with you. And many healthy people come to me not reproducing because they have something wrong. And the leading cause of all disease is inflammation. And the leading cause of inflammation is a plant-based low animal fat diet, basically sugars. Sugars glycate, which is damage to every cell molecule of our body, which causes dysfunction of our reproductive organs, our endocrine organs. And that really is the leading part that I've learned. Besides just straight plants break down to sugar and glycate and cause all the damages that you see in diabetes and hypertension. Also, the plants happen to contain estrogens and progestins and testosterone. Essentially, they're eating their birth control and or the abortion pill, which is made from plants, basically. And so, those are kind of the simple ones. The next one is interesting because fermentation of plants in your gut cause heat, alcohol, aldehydes, and methane gas. And interesting enough, the colon, which is the leading site for fermentation, sits right over the female reproductive organs. And so that increased heat from fermentation and the release of alcohols from the fermentation process into the bloodstream, I think directly adversely affects the reproductive organs also. So it's the sugars from the plants, it's the chemicals, the estrogen, progestins, testosterone are the top ones, and then it's the fermentation from those plants, and a fourth one is the plants also contain lectins, oxalates, phytates, and other glycoproteins that are highly antigenic. They're microscopic. When you eat them,
I'm sorry. Antigenic, explain.
Antigenic means something is inflammatory.
Okay.
A splinter causes redness and swelling and pain and eventual dysfunction and can cause more damage. So antigenic means that something in the environment causes your body to have an inflammatory reaction.
Okay.
Well, inflammation causes first of all, again, pain, heat, swelling, dysfunction, and eventually it can cause failure of the cells, the organ, the organism. So it damages our reproductive organs quite readily. Blood flow to the testicles and the ovaries is critical. Glycation, which is the abnormal binding of a sugar to a molecule in our body, and the leading site that it happens is in the vascular system. So the glycocalyx, which is a structure that lines every epithelial lining of our body, is a sugar layer called the mucopolysaccharide layer that essentially protects the epithelial layer. I'm throwing some words at you, aren't I, Jack?
I'm thinking, yeah.
This is new stuff that no one talks about. And if you look at the glycocalyx in the vascular system, you'll understand that the breakdown of the glycocalyx is the leading cause for cardiovascular disease. When the blood vessels are damaged, and they're damaged because of sugars, the sugars are foreign to our body. Plants like bacteria, yeast, and viruses are foreign particles. They contain a sugar layer that says, I'm friend or foe. They know how to change those sugar layers to get into you and then cause the damage. we are eating a plant-based diet that's not natural to human evolution. Human evolution was a meat-based diet, not a plant-based diet. We have the GI tract of a meat-based consumption, not a plant-based. We're not a ruminant. So basically, we're eating a tremendous amount of sugar because plants all break down to complex and simple sugars, which basically cause damage to the gut, to the vessels of the hepatic portal system that go to the liver. The hepatic portal bloodstream goes from the bowels to the liver. All blood flow from the bowels goes to the liver, all of it. And there's a reason for that, because amino acids from proteins and simple sugars from plants must go to the liver, where in the liver they are converted to fat via insulin, which is critical, because if you cannot convert the sugars to fat, you have an elevated sugar level, which causes glycation, and we call it diabetes, essentially.
Right.
And the function of insulin in the liver is to convert sugars and amino acids to fat, because fat is the fuel for our body, not sugar, which is opposite of everything everyone says. And it makes no sense that the human body would easily get fat, and fat wouldn't have some really important function in our body. It actually has the most important function. Number one, every cell membrane is made of fat. Did you know that?
I did not, but I'm
Fat,
a physician, so what would I know?
Yeah, fat is the foundation building block of our body. Have you ever noticed when you put fat into liquid, it comes together?
Yeah.
Yet you put sugar and amino acids to do it, they all dissolve. Okay? So we're always trying to lower sugar levels, aren't we?
Right.
Okay. So if you eat fatty meat, you never have elevated sugar levels. And you thrive and survive, and you eliminate the leading antigenic compounds. Remember, antigenic means it causes inflammation.
Right.
Now, most inflammation is silent until it's not. A heart attack, cancer, stroke, all the diseases that suddenly show up have been around for a long time, but you didn't know it because they're under the radar. Your body's just
that
able
threshold that created the traumatic event that we suddenly realize, oh, this is.
So as a child, I had migraines. What caused my migraines? Inflammation. Leading cause of inflammation is sugar. And sugar comes from where? Asparagus, kale, Brussels sprouts, broccoli, lettuce. Every plant is made up of a long chain carbon particle that comes from sunlight, carbon dioxide, and water. And so the problem is that we say sugar and you think white potatoes, not lettuce. So we're really kind of duped. Occam's razor says the simple answer is the one. And we know in medicine, Phil knows this, is that we have complicated stories. Yet there's got to be something really simple. Otherwise, the universe wouldn't have created what it created. This is not as complicated as they say, right? So why would the body burn fat 1 minute and sugar another? It's like breathing water 1 minute and breathing air the next. Doesn't make any sense. We're diligently working to make sugar lower and make people skinny. Yet if there's a famine, skinny is dead.
Yeah.
And skinny actually is highly infertile, because you have to have a certain amount of body fat in order to be fertile and have normal ovulation. And so if you're pregnant and you're not fat, and there's a famine, you're dead and your baby's dead. And nausea and vomiting in early pregnancy, hyperemesis gravidarum, is a protective mechanism to prevent you from eating the deadly food in the first trimester that's going to kill your baby. So it's actually a mechanism that is there to protect you, not to hurt you. But since you're skinny and you have no fat to survive the first trimester without eating, you're screwed.
Well,
You're fertilizing fast.
so the medicines, the pharmaceuticals that are prescribed to pregnant women to prevent them from having morning sickness and throwing up are actually counteracting the body's protective mechanism?
Well, they're forcing women to eat crackers, which are made of what?
Flour.
Sugar, right?
Sugar. Yeah.
Sure. And sugar glycates causes diabetes and hypertension and all the diseases we're talking about. So now you're feeding your gestating fetus sugars, right? Which is causing the child to be increased weight, right? It's going to be larger in size, and now you can't deliver vaginally. You need a C-section. But essentially, we're born with a protective mechanism for survival. But in all the modern science of the food we've been taught to eat, it's destroying our bodies. And so women that eat the crackers are feeding the sugars, which cause damage and ultimately may cause actually fetal loss, miscarriage, because glycation is the damage that happens to every cell of our body, which causes that inflammatory reaction that we call swelling, pain, redness, heat, dysfunction, failure.
We just got a
Wow.
master class. Yep.
Wow.
Explained it all.
Well, it's interesting. Let me just say one thing. There was a New York Times article yesterday about a MD that's been studying hyperemesis gravidarum for years because it's highly it's not studied at all. And she was
This is morning
time I
sickness,
saw
nausea.
someone write it. What's that?
It's morning sickness.
Morning sickness, basically.
Okay.
Right. And she was the first person I've ever heard say it's a protective mechanism to prevent us from eating the foods that are actually deadly and dangerous for us.
Wow.
Yeah, very interesting. I can't say I've heard that take on it either. And one thing I also want to make clear in this, at least some people may disagree, but it still takes a man and a woman to make a baby, and these same issues affect men as well as women and can have impacts on fertility.
We are seeing a tremendous amount of male fertility issues related to the same problem. Number
inflammation.
one, inflammation, leading causes glycation, and glycation again damages the sperm. There's a sugar coating on the sperm. There's a sugar coating on the egg. It's a sugar coating that says friend or foe, fertilize or flee. Okay, it's the same stuff, right? And these glycans, there are 9 primary glycans in humans. There are many, many glycans, and glucose is just a glycan for glycosylation, which is the binding of a sugar to a protein to make the protein functional. And the majority of the proteins in human bodies are glycosylated, and without glycosylation, we would die. But men are suffering the same problem. Sugars damage sperm. They damage the blood flow to the testicles. They damage the testosterone levels. They damage the erectile function. They damage the pituitary hypothalamus, which again, every organ system in our body, which is damaged by sugars first. Second, remember the estrogen, progesterone, testosterone that comes in the plants?
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about that. Expand on that. Keep
Well,
going.
it's really simple. I mean, the origin of almost all pharmaceutical agents came from plants. Okay. And so plants have been around for millions of years before us. Do you think every chemical and molecule made in a human being wasn't made first in a plant?
Wouldn't
They
make
may be
sense.
slightly different,
Yeah.
but the universe has been testing out life for a long time. We
Yeah.
came along a long time after they did. They make all the chemicals and more to control us and kill us, which is kind of crazy concept. But the plant phytochemicals, estrogen, progesterone, testosterone, heroin, cocaine, marijuana, nicotine, caffeine, and cyanide all come from plants. Which plant doesn't have a potentially deadly and toxic chemical in it?
They all do.
They all do, but they have smaller amounts, which some people call hormesis, and it's good for you, which I think is stupid, doesn't make any sense. Like a little bit of heroin every day is good for you, or smoking marijuana every day is good for you, or even alcohol for women is good for you. The American Journal of OBGYN recently stated Mediterranean diet and alcohol is good for a pregnant woman. Does that make sense? It doesn't.
Not to me, but I'm not a physician, so.
Right. So back to plants fermenting in the gut. Is fermentation a way to make alcohol?
Oh yeah.
So bacteria, yeast are good for you in your bowels. Is that right?
As someone who used to struggle with constant gastrointestinal distress and watched it all go away when I dramatically reduced the amount of plants I eat, I would say, no, it's not a good idea. I feel better in my gut when I don't put vegetables in particular. And that's been weird to me because I don't eat a lot of fruit. I've never been much of a fruit eater. And I used to eat a lot of veggies. I wasn't a vegetarian or anything, but I and since I basically quit eating vegetables, all that gas and bloating is just gone.
Think of dental caries as the leading disease in the world. There's a covering of the teeth called the glycocalyx, the sugar coating, which is the enamel coating of every single cell, including your teeth. By the way, the microbes love the sugar you eat. Remember, the microbes eat the sugar, which causes the damage to your teeth, right? It causes the damage to your tonsils. All of your body is basically consuming the plants with the bacteria and yeast that ferments first in the mouth and then throughout your gut. Remember, the microbes are not supposed to be in your blood vessels or your organs, are they? And yet we tell people it's good to eat them. Right? Probiotics.
Yeah,
right?
That's probiotics. That's what I'm thinking when I hear you talking about microbes.
Right.
Probiotics there's bacterium that are good in our gut and bacterium that aren't.
There are good people and bad people.
Right.
Right. Well, again, it's because we're studying the microbe environment in a plant-based diet. We're not studying that in a carnivore diet or a fasting diet, are we? So if the microbes are kind of out of hand, going crazy, and you're sick, I'm going to blame the microbes, right?
It's logical.
Rather than, why don't I look back and say, well, maybe I'm putting into your body a lot of microbes with the plants, which are fermenting, which makes, again, the heat, alcohol, aldehydes, and methane gas. Remember, increased temperature denatures DNA, doesn't it?
Well, now you're way over my head.
Well,
DNA
DNA
talk
is
about this in music school.
DNA is like the map of how to build us, right?
Right.
And essentially, the DNA is damaged by heat, alcohol, aldehydes, methane, and sugars, right? And so we're actually instructing our patients in society, in the world, to eat a healthy diet, which is plant-based, which we have no requirement to ever eat a plant or a sugar ever, by the way. And we're telling them to eat lean meat, which there is something called protein poisoning and rabbit starvation, by the way. And we're telling them
you're gonna have to unpack that at some point in this conversation too. So
and then we're telling them not to eat fat.
Yeah.
Which essentially is the building block of your body. It's the only fuel for the mitochondria. I'm sorry, if you're anorexic, you die fast because you cannot get enough acetyl-CoA from fatty acids. To make acetyl-CoA out of glucose, you have to go through 5 or 6 pathways to make pyruvate to acetyl-CoA. Yet you've got a shitload of fatty acids everywhere. Why would you use sugar when you got fat? Does it make any sense?
I get it.
So, that people listening to this are going to say, okay, so, how did we get it so wrong? Why is the advice so counter what actually makes sense when you understand the human body and nutrition and how it all works?
Otto Warburg and Hans Krebs worked for a German research institute that were paramount on scientific facts in order to push the paradigm of an industrial complex that wants to control the world. Do you think the science that came out of
this is Krebs of the Krebs cycle?
Hans Krebs, Krebs cycle, and Otto Warburg of the Warburg effect that figured out that glucose, sugar, was the cause of cancer. And how did we get it wrong? Because power in politics trumps science and
logic,
scientific
humanity.
thinking. Look, I tell people that insulin's function is to convert amino acids and sugars in the liver to fat, and that is it. It doesn't do much of anything else.
No, I've been told that insulin is like the carrier that allows the cells to absorb sugar. I don't know whether that's true or not, but
that's what they say. So science is meant to be.
I knew I was going to like you. I knew I was going to dig this conversation.
I'm not that smart of a guy, but I'm very observant. My sister Marianne died at 52 of diabetes, and my best friend Dave Kilmer died of cancer at age 52. He's my best friend in medical school. I know why my sister died, because the American Diabetic Association recommended a plant-based diet. Plants all break down to sugar, do they not? Again, that's what they tout today. But I'm just a simple guy. But when my friend Dave died, and he was healthy, built, just healthy, gets cancer, 3 months later is dead. And I'm like, okay, why did he die? So when I read a book by Richard David Feynman, The World Turned Upside Down, there was a statement in there that said carbohydrates are never required in the human diet. And I said, well, I'd never heard that one. Okay, so if plant sugars are never required, what's the function of a plant sugar, glucose? And I had to figure that one out. So if amino acids are to make proteins and fat is the fuel for the mitochondria, sugar had to have a function. No one taught us about glycosylation or the glycobiome or the glycocalyx. So COVID virus, what was the cause of its immunogenic or inflammatory process? Was it a protein on the spike protein? Or was it a sugar on top of the spike protein?
Yeah, now you're way over my head.
But this is simple. See, this is the problem. You're right. It sounds so outrageous, but how many people do you know are allergic to ribeye steak? None.
But zero.
Right. But how many people are highly allergic to peanuts, fruits, vegetables, seeds, nuts?
Yeah, nobody's allergic to meat.
No one's allergic to meat.
I've never, ever heard of anyone who has an allergy to meat.
Well, there are some, because get back to the glycobiome. The human glycobiome is specific, different than the chicken glycobiome, than a cow glycobiome, but we're similar enough that we likely don't have anaphylactic reactions, but we do have low-level inflammatory reactions for some people. Remember, the proteins break down to amino acids, and those amino acids need to be converted to fat or used for something related to protein production in the human body. But it's kind of radical, the idea that, so why would we're distrustful of science today. Why do we trust the science 100 years ago from Hans Krebs and Otto Warburg? Again, they had the same mission to get a Nobel Prize, to be top in their class, and to be powerful. So not that they lied, but remember, science is observational, theoretical. It's not fact. It's all theory. So everything is
method.
It's method, right? So we all agree on certain things enough that we can all work together. But if we don't agree on things, we can't work so well together. So let's make some assumptions that sugar is the energy, insulin's to put sugar into your cells. Okay, so one other issue. Have you ever heard of oh boy, this one is a tough one. Hepatic damage leads to diabetes in almost every single cirrhotic patient.
Hepatic damage is damage to the blood vessel?
Liver. The liver, hepatic.
Oh, the liver.
The liver.
Okay.
So hepatogenous diabetes. It's rare, they say. The American Diabetic Association, most other people will not acknowledge, but the majority of cirrhotic patients have elevated glucose and elevated insulin, and they're emaciated and thin. Why? Because the liver is the source of production of fat, and fat is not made in any other cell of your body. And glucose is to make fat, and it's for glycosylation. But we eat excessive amounts of sugar via plants that glycate and cause cancer in utero, by the way. They cause damage in utero. And many, many children, name any disease, and I will blame it on a plant-based low animal fat diet.
Wow.
And so let's dig into that a little bit. How much of the, influence of what the mom is eating, what influence does that end up having on the baby?
Well, huge, because epigenetics is the function of the environment turning genes on or off. And so in the midst of the cells dividing, and if there's damage on the microscopic level, remember, we're talking at the nuclear level, these things are damaging the cell division. They're damaging the natural process of every cell in the body. And if you're eating a plant-based diet, you're getting a little bit of heroin, cocaine, marijuana, nicotine, and caffeine. What does that have on the function of the brain? ADHD, OCD, autism. Go down the list of every disease that you can imagine that humanity has described or studied. And my bet is it's first happening in utero, and the mom and the dad's diet that they're eating is damaging or affecting the sperm and the eggs that eventually make the embryo, that's then affected in utero by that mom's diet.
I know there's going to be folks who are going to push back and say, you're oversimplifying, Dr. Kiltz. And I suspect that to a certain extent, you might be. But I'm hearing a tremendous power in the hyper focus of your message. We are in a time, I'm I'm editorializing now. I'm not asking questions. I apologize. But we're in a time when the reasonable voices are ignored, the folks who try to be nuanced, and this hyper focused message you're delivering, you might be absolutely spot on. I don't know, but I love there's a ring of, we really need to listen to this, to what you're saying, and I'm grateful for it. I got to admit, I wouldn't have expected it'd be an OB-GYN I'd be hearing this from, but thank God.
Well,
Certainly wasn't going to be a heart surgeon, but let me bring up actually one of the specific, sort of counter arguments, criticisms that gets launched at us, and we've both heard this. Breast milk is high in sugar, people will say, and so that must be evidence that we're meant to consume sugar.
Well, interesting. I'm reading a book, Ravenous, by Sam Apple, I think it is,
Yep. Mm-hmm.
on Otto Warburg. It's really interesting. Oh, no. And the other book I'm reading, this is the one I got it from, is Fat of the Land by William Stephenson, who changed his name to Wilhelmer Stephenson, who basically stated that blood and breast milk are almost identical in its molecular structure, which I thought was interesting. Okay. But my bet is that, let's see, do you want a baby to get fat over the first year or two, or to be skinny? You want it to be fat.
Want it to be
I would
fat.
assume, yeah.
Right on. So we are built to suckle on a breast to get the fatty, sugary food that was meant for an infant, a newborn, through a time until they're able to eat meat. That's what I believe. Again, a plant-based diet to an infant makes no sense. And my daughter was on a formula, plant-based formula, and I wish she'd forgive me for that, but she's doing very well, by the way, at 34. But I would say that that sugar, you can eat sugar sometimes. The problem is we eat it all the time. A little bit of fruit, fiber, vegetable, seed, or nut is okay from time to time. But remember, if you have the allergic reaction, or you get the microbe that turns out to be the one to kill you, you wish you hadn't.
Yeah.
And the beauty is we're able to convert sugars quickly to fat in the liver, because if you can't do that, you develop type 2 diabetes. As simple as that.
I had a dear friend who died from she apparently had non-alcoholic fatty liver disease.
She had plant-based fatty liver disease.
I'm reporting the news.
Well, it's the most common thing today, non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. But remember, you're fermenting the gut. You're making alcohol in your gut already. So there's always, you're going to get alcohol into your liver from the food you eat because you're making it, right?
Wait a minute. Let me make sure I understand what you're saying. Just because she wasn't consuming alcohol directly, glasses of wine, although I know for a fact she did, but she wasn't an alcoholic. The plants that she was consuming are converting to alcohol in her system, and the alcohol's getting in there anyway. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, but glycation from plant sugars are far greater damaging than a little bit of alcohol from time to time, is my bet. Because we're taking care of diseases that are all sugar related. Although that's a good point, Jack, that see, 100% of liver function produces a quick 100% of conversion of sugars to fat via insulin. But as you lose functionality of your liver cells, fatty liver, sclerosis, cirrhosis, and the damage, the amount of cells that convert the sugars to fat goes down. So now you're spilling more sugars over into the circulation, and you're fermenting. So that little alcohol can be contributing to the damage of the sugars.
Gotcha.
That's the kind of the craziness. And you got to think about, sugar alcohols are look at all the erythritol or the fake sugars everyone's eating that say, oh, they're fine. They're not fine. They're deadly. And again, everyone's trying to trump, well, look at, I would use them from time to time. I drink some alcohol from time to time, but I'm not going to say that they're good for you.
Yeah. I think that's one of the best things about drinking. I love whiskey, and I am under no illusions that when I'm drinking whiskey, I'm doing something that's good for my body. I know that if I'll do it in small quantities, it's less damaging, and I find that it creates a social environment with dear friends that is good for the soul. And yet I'm not under any illusion that
I think
feeding myself.
If you look at longevity, it's likely related to social, cultural connectedness. And
we hadn't even gotten into that. I know that's a big deal for you. So yeah, let's.
Well, I'm just going to say about the whiskey. Remember, whiskey is an antiseptic, is it not?
Yes.
Is it possible that a little bit of whiskey may be taking care of some of those microbes in your mouth and your gut? Now,
I truly do think that. When I start feeling sick, one of the first things I will do is get maybe a half a shot of whiskey into me.
I think William Banting wrote about that because part of his diet was a little bit of cordial of something. Might have been whiskey. I don't know what it was.
I do know, and this has, there's somebody out there needs to subject this to rigorous methodological review, but because I'm a whiskey snob, this one stuck into my head. Somebody said, does it make any sense to use whiskey? Does it make any sense to use spirits to disinfect, for example, the top of a bar? And so somebody just said, let's just check it. And I don't know how you go about doing this, but they measured the disinfecting capability of rum and tequila and vodka and gin and whiskey. And it turns out the only thing that killed all the germs was whiskey. Now, I'm a whiskey guy, so naturally I remember that. But I do know that whiskey, not bourbon, but whiskey has less sweetness to it.
Less
than all
sugar.
the others. Well, that's my assumption.
The bacteria and yeast love sugar.
Okay, we went a direction we didn't need to go. Talk about.
I was going to say, let's bring it around here, Rob. So, for people who are dealing with fertility issues, what's your main advice?
Well, I often focus on faith and belief first in the outcome you desire, because worry never gets you anywhere. But if you can focus on that, which I think if you look at humans, God is an important component of our lives. So I talk a little bit about that and helping people drive into the positivity. And nutrition is critical. And I ask them, what are you eating? And they usually say healthy, organic, and clean. I'm like, no, exactly what do you eat? Write it down. Let me know, so that I'm looking for the thing that's more likely than not to be a culprit in this. I talk about keto because everyone and anyone, even a vegan, can do keto. I talk about fasting. And then I say, well, now 5% can do carnivore, and it might be the thing you're willing to do. And I write a lot about it, I blog about it. So I share the why part of it, the sugars and the antigens and the chemicals and the fermentation. And I also talk about excessive exercise. Slow it down, cool it down. Too much is not good for any of us. I started running again for 1 week, and I gave it up after 1 week, and realized I stick to my bike, my rowing, and my light weights. And I went snowboarding for a few days, but I knew today was my rest day, because if I tried one more day, I would be at the urgent care for some reason. But again, most important thing is never give up, have faith. Look at nutrition as likely the most important thing that's causing you to be infertile, even though you're healthy, and everything we're looking at says you're normal, but you're not, because you're not conceiving. And by going keto or carnivore and fasting, it'll help tremendously.
Now you did say something, some extremely small percentage is capable of being carnivore.
Oh,
or did I misunderstand
everyone?
you?
No, 100% are capable, but it's the 5% rule. I say keto is for the masses and carnivore is for the masters, meaning that convincing most people to go carnivore is a hard sell. I'll share it. The guys are a little more easy than the gals, but I think the most valuable thing we can do, and when we say carnivore, we're talking about a high fat diet. Remember, well, you may not know this, but when you eat fat, it goes to the lymphatics. It does not go to the liver.
I didn't know that.
And the diet we recommend is fruit, fiber, vegetables, seeds, nuts, and lean meats. No red meat, little, right? Well, there's no fat in that diet. We do not eat fat. But fat is the fuel for the body. If you simply ate fat, you would heal your gut, you'd fuel the body, you'd feel better than ever, and your reproduction and the other many other things. Like for me, arthritis, psoriasis, migraines, kidney stones, bowel bleeding went away in less than a month. And so
but you're supposed to be dead. You've been doing this for 12 years.
Yeah, I was dead a long time ago. But you know, again, I will have a French fry, or I'm not 100%. Because I live in a world, I fly airplanes, I drive cars, I swim, I take a shower, I walk in the streets. You know, even yesterday I was walking upstairs after my 3 days of snowboarding, and I tripped once, and I got myself up. I tripped a second time, and thankfully, it was hysterical. But recognizing that everything we do in life is risky. Heroin, marijuana, cocaine, those are things that, no, right? Okay, maybe a cigar with my buddies once in a while I don't inhale. But any of a whiskey, wine, or beer, I might have a martini once in a while. So this is not say, boy, you better never do that, because that's not life.
Yeah.
We're really in a culture of from time to time, but I used to go out every night. I drink, wine with my buddies, and I just turned 67 on Sunday, and I've never felt better in my life. And I would tell you that if you maximize the carnivore side, minimize the plant side, if you eat plants, cook them well to kill the microbes, and
don't eat them raw.
Don't eat raw. Raw plants are not good for us at all.
I figured that out long before I ever heard any of this other stuff. And it was just, I thought it was just me, but I noticed when I ate all these raw things that were supposed to be so good for me, I felt terrible.
Well, think of the food industry and the governmental industry and all the science industry. Money has become the most important mission.
Yeah.
Not mommies, men, or masters. And as a physician, I went into medicine to help people. And I'm saddened to see what's going on, and that science is supposed to be open-minded. Step back. Well, what do you mean glucose isn't the energy for mitochondria? What do you mean it isn't the brain or why would the brain use glucose for energy when it's got fat everywhere? And have you ever seen the blood-brain barrier? What is it like? Is it like the Great Wall of China or the Berlin Wall? I mean, things get through it in ways people don't understand. But glucose is for glycosylation. Glycosylation happens at the speed of light. if you're not glycosylating those proteins so fast in order to move your nanomotors to create the hormones, the neurotransmitters, everything in your body is happening at the speed of light. We cannot conceive at the speed of light. This idea that you take glucose to pyruvate when you got acetyl-CoA sitting around going like, I came from fat, like you got plenty of fat and I made you fat. So you as an idiot could survive the famine, the war, the pestilence, the disease, or the early pregnancy and hyperemesis. Being skinny is the worst process that we pushed on humanity in the world ever.
We're just going to let that sit. I love that. And it's not that being lean is unhealthy. It's this weird mindset that the best way to get to that ideal state is to abandon all the foods that we have been eating for thousands of generations because we're now morally superior than everyone who came before us, I guess. This is not my show. I need to shut up.
Well, it's, again, let's see. My grandmother lived 104. She smoked Pall Malls, drank Manhattans, and she was an Italian. She
How
ate
often
all
do
the
we
Mediterranean.
hear that?
What's that?
How often do we hear stories like that?
All the time.
All the freaking time.
The whole intent here is not to say, boy, you better be carnivore or you're not going to live a long time. This has nothing to do with that. If you're suffering or you want to minimize disease of the future, you got to add more fat. Animal fat, by the way, is the way.
Animal fat.
And you want to reduce the amount of plants you eat. Now, if you want to be a vegan or vegetarian, again, eat once a day, add more fat, coconut fat, animal fat. Those technically, I say oils come from plants and fat comes from animals. And there's no evidence that cholesterol or LDL or fats cause any disease. You see, sugar did the damage and fat gets the blame because all the sugar converted to fat. And so it's like, gee, sugar's not the problem, fat is. And so we're very judgmental to fat. Obesity causes no disease, by the way. Obesity causes no disease. The cause of obesity is a sugar-laden plant-based diet that not only makes you fat to survive the famine, it causes the damage. Likely you ate the plants in season, not all the time. And nowadays we're told, oh, don't ever kill an animal or eat fatty meat, right? Plants are living organisms. They're not dumb. They're far smarter than you and I. They know how to get you to eat them. They probably are putting their DNA into us also, by the way, just like a virus and a bacteria and yeast. And then they know how to control us and kill us. And they make us fertilizer. And who wins? The rose garden.
But we've had like 6 mic drop moments in the last hour, and I just let it go because we keep getting them.
The whole circle of life right there.
Oh my God.
And the only thing that matters is one thing. Reproduction.
Reproduction. Exactly. That's what we're here for. Very good. So why don't you let people know where people can find you, and if they're struggling with reproduction. I know you practice in many locations, so give us a little information about all of that.
Well, it's just drkiltz.com. Rob Kiltz, Instagram, YouTube, Facebook, wherever. I'm mostly at CMY Fertility Syracuse, but people find me on Instagram, YouTube, and all those places. I do a 5 a.m. live Eastern time on Instagram, YouTube, Facebook, most every day. Some days depends where I'm at, but I've been doing it at 3 a.m. from Colorado to keep my time. But I love the conversation. And you got to have fun with this, by the way. This is not meant to be a debate. It's meant to be a conversation over some nice whiskey, maybe a cigar from time to time.
Come to Phoenix, please. We'll sit on my back patio right there. I have a lovely selection of whiskey, and we will continue this conversation. And Phil, you need to be there too,
I'll
obviously.
be in
can attest.
Scottsdale, June.
Seriously?
Yeah, I'm coming for jet training. I have to train in my jet every year.
Let's make it a date.
I'm going to do that. I'll do that. I'll connect with Phil and make that happen. I'd love to connect because
Fantastic.
the more we share these ideas, this is where medicine is on its next level, is teaching people ways to heal themselves
Oh,
and enjoy life.
Phil, just time after time after time, you're letting me meet people that it just makes me so happy to hear people with these kinds of ideas and the courage to say it in the face of an overwhelming flood of I think the technical term is bullshit. So
Which is fertilizer. That's all fertilizer.
Which is fertilizer.
We're all going to be fertilizer one day.
Eventually.
And, we're sharing our ideas in adventure, and that's the best we can do.
Heading to be worm food. All right. Well, we will make sure all that contact information shows up on the show notes. For Dr. Philip Ovadia, Dr. Robert Kiltz, this is the Stay Off My Operating Table podcast. We'll talk to you next time. America is fat and sick and tired. 88% of Americans are metabolically unhealthy and at risk of a sudden heart attack. Are you one of them? Go to ifixhearts.co and take Dr. Ovadia's metabolic health quiz. Learn specific steps you can take to reclaim your health, reduce your risk of heart attack, and stay off Dr. Ovadia's operating table.